Hello! Welcome back to Mr. Bob's Builds. In this episode I talk about the techniques I use to blend acrylic paints on a figure. There's nothing novel included, but I thought you might find it interesting. When I start a figure, I use an airbrush to set the base tone, and then again to set the basic lights and shadows. I then move on to finish the figure off with a brush. As well as picking out areas of detail such as the eyes, the aim of the brushwork is to add contrast and volume by defining and emphasizing shapes, mostly by manipulating areas of light and shade. This is achieved by blending in acrylic colors on top of the airbrushed base coats. In order to achieve a seamless transition from one shade to the next, the modeler has a variety of techniques to choose from. I'm going to demonstrate two of those techniques today, the first of which is layering, the second of which is wet on wet blending. And I'll refer to a third technique which is known as two brush blending, but that's new to me as well. As well as the following demonstration, I'll provide links to videos of people doing it properly. I really enjoyed making this video, but the outcome is really a tiny bit clumsy. Nevertheless, I hope that you find it useful. So here we go. With layering, the idea is to put progressively lighter or darker shades on top of each other in semi-transparent layers so that the colour gradually changes from one to another. The first lump of colour there you see is the English uniform, and on top of that I put the straight beige colour, and as you can see there's a stark difference between the two colours, and we'd use this as a highlight. This is the base colour and then a darker one for a shadow, and we want a smooth transition from this colour to this colour, and we're going to do that by layering. To provide a very quick demonstration, we've got the base colour there, then 2/3 of the way up we're going to put a mid-tone. This is just going to do 3 layers here, and then we'll let that dry, and then on top of those 2 colours we'll put the third, which is the light. So you can already see a smoother transition from the dark to the light, and that's just through 2 layers. At the risk of teaching you to suck eggs, I'm going to talk very briefly about brush dynamics. When brush is applied to the surface, we hope to achieve an even stroke of paint. However, more paint is deposited when the brush lifts. The most paint is left at the end of the stroke. You see a puddle there and there. And with blending techniques we can use that to our advantage by always making sure the brush strokes go to the area we want to either lighten or darken. So if we're highlighting, the brush stroke will go from the dark to the light, and if we're doing a shadow area, this is a light colour paint, we'd work from the dark to the light. The light to the dark. So highlighting always works to the highest point of light. Now to do a bit of layering on a piece of primed and base coated plastic. That's a big chunk of plastic, and I'm going to be using 9 coats of paint, including the base colour. That's nowhere enough for that size of object. However, it serves as a useful demonstration. Right, this is the base colour. This is the first of the shades, which is the base colour with a little bit of the beige. So dark, a little bit light, and that first layer has now gone onto the plastic, working the brush upwards with my number 2 Winsor & Newton. And I'm now letting that dry. You don't want to watch that dry. It'd be just like watching paint dry. Time for the third layer, which is this one, which is again a thin mix. Put it there, a tiny bit lighter than this one, and then this one. Very thin, if you see. Make sure that there's nothing going to be dripping on the work, and then working upwards again, slightly inwards from the last boundary. paint on and stop. Now we come to the next layer, lighter still. You can see it's beginning to show lighter now that's the base. This is the base, second, third. So it's had 3 layers, and here it's starting to get more opaque as the layers build up. And you're beginning to see lines where each layer was, and we're going to deal with those in a minute. Now I'm going to put the next layer on. And it's important to let each layer dry fully, because if you don't, you're just going to lift the previous layers off, or you're going to leave brush marks. And I learnt this the very hard way. When I first started doing figures, I was using Vallejo's own thinner, which is model colour thinner, which is basically just a medium. It's got no solvents in it. And then I started using their airbrush thinner because I was using it for the airbrush. I thought I'd use it for brush stroking as well. And it worked like a gem to thin the paint. But then I noticed it was lifting the underneath layers off. It was acting like the hairspray technique, activating the paint and lifting the layers off. And that was a lesson hard learned. Okay, so the next one on, and again this is going to show a line where I put it. So that one started there, so we're going to move up quickly with our wet paint. Doesn't matter, it's not straight. That's probably best that it's not straight, actually. And stop. And then once that's dry, we'll have a look at the lines it's forming. You can see it here already. It's tide lines. The fact that there's a light shining down on it doesn't really help, but we'll deal with those. See just about where the layers are. So we started here, the first layer was there, and there's a slight darkening and then a slight lightening rather, and then the next lightening there, and here it's beginning to get more marked, and that's because the layers are building up. And to deal with those, it's quite an interesting process. If we go back to, this was the colour here, so we go back to the previous colour, put a bit in our palette. Wet it down even more so it's just a thin wash. Start feathering those edges. It'll still show through to start with, but by the time we've finished it won't. We can go a tiny bit darker with this one here. Feather down a bit lower. So you're building up layers, and in between the layers we're doing washes just to bind them all together. Right, it's time for the next layer, and what I'm going to do now is basically going to do this off camera. So it'll be each successive layer, put on a wash between, and then we'll come back and have a look at it when those layers are all on. Just to add a bit of contrast to this demo, I've added now on that second column a couple of coats of straight beige on top of the English uniform. The purpose of this was just to demonstrate the difference between laying a single colour on top of a coat of paint and layering in the same colour, moving up gradually from dark to light. As I've been going along, I've been using the blends just to do washes between each layer to make sure the edges get threaded out. Now I'm just going to get a bit of the English uniform, stretch around the camera, get some water, lots of it, wash my mixing brush out, don't want anything, and then mix that into a very thin wash, tiny bit too thin perhaps. Drop of paint. It's better. I dropped a bit of paint on my work, which is a bit of water rather. Right, hairbrush time. Now one last thin wash of paint. Should start tying these together a bit more. That's on there, and it's time to leave it. Okay, let's have a look at the fruits of our labours. This was straightforward beige put on top of English uniform. It's just to show the difference in the colour. It's just a couple of thin layers of paint just put on there for example. Here we've got a layered transition between the two using semi-transparent layers of paint. Now this colour is exactly the same as that colour, but this has got 8 layers of progressively lightening colour beneath it. Well, I wouldn't be happy with this as a blend on a figure. It's not a bad demonstration example. We can see against where the tape was, the base colour, and a darkening from light to dark coming down here to around about here, which is where the blending started. Well, that's not bad, but it's messy. And to layer over this sort of expanse of plastic, you'd be looking at a lot more layers than the base colour and then 8 layers on top that I was giving there. So not a bad demonstration, but I wouldn't be happy with it on a figure. I'll put a couple of links in the notes to figure modelers who use layering techniques to paint faces. They're fantastic videos and well worth a look. There's a postscript to this section. While I was converting this video ready for YouTube, I watched fellow ISM forum member Coen's reveal shots of his Conan the Barbarian figure. And I just couldn't publish this video without saying a few words about it. For an example of how well blending techniques can work with skin tones, I strongly recommend that you see that video. The figure is absolutely awesome. I'll put a link to it in the notes. Michael, if you're watching this, you say some very nice things about my work in your video, and I thank you for that very much. I'm chuffed to bits. But man, your modelling skills are from a different planet, and I've learnt so much from you. If I've been able to give something back, well, that's brilliant. Anyway, on with the show. A quick look at wet blending. This is a technique used by watercolour artists. They'll soak their canvas, their watercolour paper with water to a certain consistency, and then when they move their pigments across the paper, the pigments really soak in and start to feather out by capillary action. And doing this with acrylics is basically the same. We put a wet coat on the work, move in with some paint, add it to it, and then quickly feather it out, and the capillary action starts to feather it in. Now, if there's a trick to it, which is not to have the wet mixture the same consistency as the blending colour. The wet mixture, which will be the English uniform, will be spread on there, and then a slightly thicker beige colour will be added, and then quickly feathered out. My brush is wet there, let's let that dry out. And let's quickly demonstrate that. It needs a very determined and swift action, because you don't want the wet coat drying out on you before you add the other. So a wash consistency, adding to the work. Already that's points up. Add just enough paint to do. We'll just do the corner here, and then we can feather it out and leave it. So doing that now, we let that dry completely before we go back and have a look at it, because you'll start to ruckle the paint up. It's highly effective for smaller areas, the tops of creases, for example. Doesn't have quite the dazzling transition of a well-worked layering blend, but it's highly effective and a lot quicker. Sometimes you want to blend in a contrasting colour, or in a shadow area, for example, in which case, well, you might not necessarily want to blend into a wash of the base colour. You can do the same thing with water, and I'm coming to the other corner where I did that light there, and I'm just dampening the work with water, cleaning the brush, getting the tip of my brush only into the colour I want to put on there, and add the colour to the corner, and then feather out into the liquid, and then let that dry. So I want this area up here highlighted with the wet in wet technique. I want it bigger. I can just go back again with my wash. I'm going to leave the bit there which is at the very highest and come back here and spread my wash down so it's wet. Clean the brush off very quickly. Dry it on the see, no, that's tricky. It's getting a skin on it, and then do that, and then feather it down, which has increased the area of the highlight in the blend. So let's have a quick look at the results of that. And first of all, here was the light blended on top twice. First of all, and then set a second layer of light on top, and this is the system of blending that I really like to use when I paint figures. It's straightforward to use and gives a very nice transition from the brightest colour into the darkest, and that is on a layer of the base tone wash, and it just feathers in very nicely. Here, for the purpose of demonstration, I put a red on top of the brown. Why you want to do that, I don't know. But on top of water, so it didn't blend in with the different colour to change the value. And that was, again, add water, then a slightly thicker consistency, which it would be if it's just on top of water, of the paint. Paint it on and then feather it out and let it dry. I now move on to describe two brush blending. As the demonstration shows, I'm not yet proficient at this technique, but it does provide the basics, and I'll provide links to real experts. A warning: the following video contains bodily fluids. What I'm going to do now is something that's completely new to me. I've only been trying it out on for the last month or so. It's something I saw on YouTube, which is two brush blending, which is like the wet in wet process we saw here. But the paint goes on to a dry area, and then a damp brush moves in and with a point drags the paint out. Now this uses a very special medium as the dampener on this, and that's turn away now if you don't like bodily fluids. It's spit. Now I was doubtful on this. I saw it on YouTube and I thought I'd give it a go. And the thing about spit is that it acts as a resist, so the paint doesn't leach out too far. And it seems to act as a grip on the paint and helps you to spread it out. The people I saw on YouTube doing it are actually putting their brushes in their mouths to add the spit, and actually doing the same to clean their brush. That's up to them, of course, but I don't really fancy that myself. While our acrylic paints are generally non-toxic, companies such as Vallejo in their safety data sheets will list some of their paints as containing pigments such as cadmiums, which are held to be carcinogenic. So for my money, I try and avoid brush licking as much as possible. So what I did was put a bit of spit in a well palette. Now, best if you're going to do this to have your excuses ready if your partner or your parents walk in and find you drooling into a paint cup. But I'll show you that now. But I'm not going to show you me sticking it in the spit. So here goes. Brush number 1 of the two brush method picks up the paint, deposits it in the area where you want it. It's beginning to dry out that paint. This is going to be very good. And then brush number 2, loaded with your spit, wets the area, grabs the paint and starts to feather it out. Let's do that again with some fresh paint. Brush number 1 puts paint on the work. Brush number 2 with your moisture, this bit here, grabs the colour, starts to draw it down. Next up was the two brush blending, which is a very similar process but goes down dry and then uses a damp brush to feather out. And it's a very good system, and I can see myself using this for small areas on a figure. I tried it with a bigger lump of paint, and although it's softened the edge, that's for sure. It's a bit clumsy and messy. Well, that's it for now. I hope that you found it interesting and hopefully useful. There are 2 more episodes in this series. First up I make a base for the figure, and then it's the reveal. This video set a new record for me as I'm approaching 20 minutes, and that's quite enough. So it's time to say goodbye for now. Thank you for watching, and come back soon.